Hi, everyone. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and today I'm joined by Efrain Villa and Jonathan Medina, who play the uncles Mondo and Jay, respectively, on the new eight-part Amazon Freevee comedy series Primo. Welcome, guys. Um, Talk
Thanks,
about
Ray.
the experience of making the series, if you would, and how it differed from your previous acting gigs. Let's start with you, Efrain.
Sure, sure. First of all, thank you for having us. It's so nice to be here. Anytime we get to talk about Primo, I think we are all super excited. So thank you. Um, so my experience with the show is that this is the first time I've been a series regular. It is a very, very big difference in a lot of different ways. There's the obvious agency that goes with being a series regular and having so much more creative control. Um, and so I think that's the biggest piece from the artistry side is being able to hone your craft. It's also um, a different process. I think all of us as actors can relate to how quickly your skills atrophy when you're not doing something continuously. So the cool part about being on a show, an eight-part show, is that you're on set every day or close to every day for several months, and you can very quickly begin to feel how much sharper your craft becomes, how much more attuned and how much better you're able to react and adapt. And so I think those were the biggest differences for me.
How about you, Jonathan?
For me, it was a blessing to be on a show as a series regular, and it was also my first series regular and a comedy because I typically do dramatic roles, and this was a whole different beast, as anybody who's in the business will attest. Yeah, and it felt great to be with this incredible cast. Primo is chock full of amazing people, both behind the camera and in front, and it made it I think one of the best experiences of my life, short of marrying my wife.
Did you get a lot of advice from Shea Serrano, your showrunner and writer creator of the show, whose life the show is largely based on? Efrain, did Shea say no? My uncle would never do that.
I don't think it was ever. It was there was a lot of positive reinforcement at all times, not just from Shay, from all people involved on the show. It was a very nurturing environment to be on set, and so yeah. I don't recall a whole lot of "don't do this." There was a whole lot of "that's amazing. You're on the right path. That's beautiful," and I think it was more. It was handled through positive reinforcement more than on the don't do this, don't do that. And that process took place from the very beginning, even before we were on set. From the auditioning process, we were, the audition process is so much about creating and exploring and playing. And so there was a ton of direction on that. Um, that went through that carried through on set as well. I think we were given a lot of room to create. In my specific case, I felt like there was a lot of variance between takes, and that's what made watching the show for the first time, once it went through the wizardry of post production, it's what made it such an amazing experience for me, because I also got to meet Mondo for the first time. Right, I didn't know how all of those different takes and all that variability was going to be threaded, and thankfully, because of the mastery of phenomenal editing, um, it created a character that I very much liked, and I'm very proud of the work that I got to contribute in creating that character.
You're so quirky and eccentric in this show, Efrain.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really fun.
it's super
Um,
fun. I mean, right down to like his profession, right? Like he carves out felli, whatever the plural of phallus is. He carves out a lot of them and sells them, and I mean, I just think that speaks to like to his quirks, right? Like he lives in his own universe with that capital U, and I think that's the beauty of Mondo, is that he's so carefree and so not attached to outer opinions, external opinions.
and Jonathan Jay is so different. I mean, so kind of intense and focused, and different than actually radically different than the other uncles on the show.
Yeah, Jay's the oldest, So I think he bears a lot of the responsibility for helping Drea kind of keep the family together and raise the family in his mind and his way. And so there was a lot of that involved. And I think it also helped shape the character of Jay in that he plays everything very close to the vest. He's handling so much responsibility, some of it real and some of it not so real. And there's a lot of love in there, and he just doesn't know how to express it because of all of the responsibilities, all the balls that he's got up in the air trying to juggle. So yeah, he's Jay's full of love. It expresses in very small little squeaks.
Literal squeaks. That was one of my favorite scenes for you, Jonathan. When you're in the truck in the van, and right before they cut, you hear him give a little squeal like he's about to start bawling. It's like, that was nice. It was a split second, but I love that.
It was a good cutaway.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how if you had any favorite scenes. I guess that's one. Favorite things that your character does, or did you ever have any, maybe put a different way, did you ever any input into the writing at all, or maybe able to do a little improv or make suggestions?
Sure, there was
Efrain?
improv. There was definitely room for playing, and like I said, a lot of room for exploring. My favorite scenes are actually, because I think anyone who's been through the process of creating such a collaborative process that involves so many sophisticated elements, I think it's easy to get lost in that process as well. So for me, when I watch the show, I see trees and not forest necessarily. I love the work, I love the scenes, but my brain doesn't always watch the way that I watch a show that I had no part in, right? Where I can just sit back and just receive it. That's definitely not what the watching experience is for me. With Primo, it's still an incredibly rich experience, and I love watching Primo. It's just not quite the same as an audience. I love the really weird scenes that I think no one else laughs at, like just brief little moments, like I mentioned with Jay. I have a couple of those with Mike as well. I think like there's a part where he just very quickly asks Primo during the career fair why Primo would think that Mike doesn't have a girlfriend since he took care of the deodorant problem. And like there's just small little things that you don't really catch. And yeah, there are so many of those just brief little moments. Also, when Mike and Rolly are talking and he says something, he's very defensive about his height, obviously, and he says something like, he's the same height as Tom Cruise, Sexiest Man Alive, 1999, and then Rolly does something like, it's just that. Oh, and I know another one with Jay. When they're doing the bit, I think it's in the pilot episode with the but your butt, like Rolly's not quite landing it until he lands it at the very end, and all of the brothers are agreeing, and Jay enthusiastically agrees by pointing. Like that's how Jay shows enthusiasm.
Yeah.
That's Jay losing his stuff right there. Just
pretty close.
Did either of you have a lot of interaction with Mike Schur? He's like a comedy legend, as you know. The Office, Parks and Rec, The Good Place, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Hacks. The guy's sort of like a comedy encyclopedia for TV.
He was behind the scenes a couple of times. He came to set a lot, especially in the beginning, and we got to see him. We got to see him and talk to him off camera and offset before we started shooting. At least a couple of us did that I know of, and then he was involved in a lot of the first few episodes as far as throwing in one-liners when they were working the scenes or trying to sort of nail down our characters. He was around a lot, and he was great. The thing about Mike is he is so nice. I mean, him and Shay share that in common. Like they're super nice guys, and you have no idea as you're talking to them until they come up with a joke. Like you forget, because it's just like talking to a really nice guy that you meet on the street. and then all of a sudden they come up with this amazing material, or they come up with this incredible idea, and the next thing you know, we look great.
Yeah. And I think a lot of his fingerprint, a lot of his DNA is in this specific show. It carries through by proxy. I think a lot of this was, from what I've read, and I certainly don't want to speak for anyone, but it sounds like a lot of this was Mike Schur's opportunity to mentor, to give back, to contribute in a different way. And so I think that's what that partnership that's how that partnership formed, and how that collaborative process sort of evolved. And so I this is very much a Mike Schur continuation, right? In all of that insane canon that you just described. But I think it's also an opportunity for like the Shirley Serranos of the world to take the helm.
So it's sort of Mike's way to mentor Shay into television in a more meaningful and permanent way. And as far as the giving back part.
I think so. From what I've read, and from the conversations that I've had, and again, I don't want to speak for anyone. Shay is very open about. I mean, Shay's a humble guy, right? And I think he's very open about giving credit where credit is due, and he gives so much credit to Mike Schur, and I think that's sort of speaks to the type of dynamic that they had and have.
I know you guys are both young actors, but you have some experience, and I just wondered, I think you both sort of grew up in a world where there was more Latinx inclusion and representation, more so than 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago, for sure. And I actually had a chance to speak to John Leguizamo yesterday about some of the battles that he's fought over Latinx representation. I also spoke with Jimmy Smits, who has become a friend, and they talked about having to steer clear of being hired to play gang members and drug dealers early in their careers, but that things have changed a lot. Not just for them, but for Latinos on both sides of the camera. Has it been an issue at all for either of you in terms of your ethnicity?
I mean, I've played plenty of gangsters, and thugs and whatnot, but I do it with I gladly do it, and a lot of it has to do with not having choice, right? Like, I mean, I think if I were J-Lo, perhaps I could take my pick at whatnot, but no one has been offering me Batman recently, so a lot of the actor struggle is cutting your teeth where you can cut your teeth, and sometimes that means that you do play a thug, and sometimes that means that you play people who in your heart are not authentic and genuine. And more power to the people who can do that, who can have that kind of agency and that kind of vision over what their career can look like, to turn down those kind of roles. I think that's very honorable and very noble. I have not reached that level of nobility.
It's really honest, actually, to share that. And and you're right. You need to make money. You need to earn a living, and that's if you can play those honestly and authentically, those roles. It's not a negative. It's a way to be an actor.
Well, I think one of the things you can also do, Ray, like you talk about Jimmy Smits. I mean, L.A. Law, West Wing are two of the big things that I think about when I think about Jimmy Smits. And I can say that from my experience, one of the best ways that I could go about taking those roles and then doing something more with them was embodying as much humanity in any of the roles that I took. Like the very first role that I had was I was a serial killer, polygamist cannibal.
Wow. Wow. So you were basically just like Jay.
I was the trifecta, and I remember there was one day on set. Autumn Reeser was the top of show on that one. And she turned to me at one point and she looked and she said, God, I feel such empathy for you.
Wow.
And she was one of the women that I was keeping in my little harem. And it was such a compliment to hear, because, and I was genuinely trying to play it from this man's perspective where he didn't see himself as the villain, right? He saw himself as a human. He was broken in a lot of ways, obviously. And you try as much as you can to fill out those roles with as much humanity and hope that it translates on film. And then, you know, when you get to a certain point, I mean, I have at various points throughout the last 10 years turned down roles, and I wanted to work. Believe me, I wanted to work. But there was a point where I said to, you know, I have had a couple of reps. I said to my reps, I said, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something else. It can't be just this time after time after time. And I knew with my wife and I, we sat down and we had this, it was a very serious discussion. And I said to her, listen, the road is going to be a little longer. And if that's okay with you, then that's how I'd like to go. And that's what we did. So
what a contrast, right? Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Dave.
No,
like,
go ahead, Efrain.
What a contrast to be in that position and then be in the position of Primo, right? Where you're being nurtured and it's such a safe environment to be authentic. Because I've also been on sets, and this is specific to me and my background. So I grew up very much Mexican, right? I'm first generation. I didn't speak English until way later in life. And so and I didn't grow up in the kind of household where we did, you know, that beautiful thing that people do where they mix English and Spanish. I grew up in a household where that was a capital sin. You did not mix languages, speak English or Spanish, not both. And so I've been on sets where I'm being directed by someone who has no idea what Spanish looks like or is, and I'm being directed to say something that I know is completely wrong. And I've made suggestions, you know, like, well, if you want to fix this isn't a word. I know it's used in English, but not in Spanish, and it has a completely different connotation. It'll sound absolutely ridiculous to a Spanish speaker. And basically the answer that comes back is that's okay. If it sounds ridiculous to a Spanish speaker, that's what imagination is for. And so that's not at all what took place in Primo, right? Like first of all, we're representing a family that has been in Texas for several generations, so that already took care of the language issue. But I think also even just exploring your own character, there was just a lot of, like I said, support and nurturing and just letting trust do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, well, you know, that's infuriating though when you say stuff like that, Efrain, where it's like, this is ridiculous. No Latino is going to take this seriously if you allow this to go on your air or whatever. And have them say, that's okay, we don't care. That's an incredible disrespect. And you would hope that doesn't happen too often.
I
But
think
you're
it's very
right.
standard, right? Yeah.
When that's disappointing. But it's so refreshing, as you just said, to see a comedy, you know, about an extended Latino family that doesn't spend all its time calling attention to its Latinness and is so authentic at the same time. You know, it's just incidental to your characters rather than central, is the fact is your ethnicity.
100%. 100%.
And I'm sure that, and you have that on both sides of the camera with the Latinx representation on this show, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Representation of it looks like a UN gathering on set. It's not just Latinx, it's every color. There are Filipinos and Black people, and if you look at any of the Gonzalez's parties, you'll see that their parties also look like a UN gathering. And that was amazing. It's not something that happens without being deliberate and intentional.
Well, you know, you go back in time to the 1950s and you hear the stories about I Love Lucy and how hard they had to fight for Desi Arnaz to even allow him to be hired to play Lucille Ball's husband when he was, in fact, her real life husband, you know, and that battle. And, you know, I'm sure it was Lily White to the core to watch that, you know, in terms of the crew. So it's nice to see that some of the battles that have been fought have really paid dividends on shows like this.
Yeah.
Sure. And that are currently being fought, because it's a challenge that it doesn't allow for resting on your laurels, right? Like there are still plenty of challenges ahead of us as well.
There's also been such a great response to the show, to Primo and the critical community, 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. That has to feel pretty gratifying too.
Yeah, that's nice. There's
sure
something
you
that
will.
it appeals to everybody because of what you just said, the fact that it's a family first and happens to be Latino, right? And there's something for everyone. I've said this a number of times in a couple of interviews. I've had a number of people in a watch party situations from, from the Middle East, from Europe, from Middle America, and everyone has someone on the show that they identify with, sometimes multiple people. And it's the first time I think I've seen that in a long while. And it's the magical, beautiful part of being on Primo.
Yeah, and it's also it's art, right? So art is made to be shared. It's made to be interacted with in a public way, and so it is extremely validating. And yes, all of those like very storied legacy uh outlets that are raving about the show, that is incredibly validating. I think for me, it was also just uh as nerve-wracking to watch the show in front of friends and family, because these are the same people who've seen you do not stellar work, right? And you know that they're going to be supportive anyway. But then to get the opportunity to share something that you're actually proud of, and you want it to land, you want them to share your pride in it, and so that was also amazing. Yes, I'm really glad that the New York Times loved it, and Esquire and Vulture and Hollywood Reporter, etc. But it's also just really cool when you're like incredibly detail oriented and quick to criticize. Mother loves it, for example,
Mhm.
or kind of loves it.
Well, your pride is justified in this show. It's really terrific, really well done. Um, with that, we're actually out of time. You can stream all 8 episodes of Primo over Amazon Freevee. Efrain Villa and Jonathan Medina, take good care, and thanks for joining us today at Gold Derby.
Thanks so much,
Thank you
Ray.
for having us.